Sunday night late show.
My next guest is no stranger to the Ed Sullivan Theater.
Thanks again to President Barack Obama. Go on sale for the Obama Presidential Center tomorrow morning, and it opens on June 19th.
There are moments in television history that feel like the end of something bigger than just a show. When Johnny Carson walked off the Tonight Show stage for the last time in 1992, people cried. Not because they were losing a program, but because they were losing a nightly companion, a voice that had been part of the rhythm of American life for decades. What is happening right now with Stephen Colbert, and The Late Show feels like one of those moments. And the more you dig into the details of how it happened and why, the harder it is to shake the feeling that something went very wrong here, not just for late-night television, but for the broader idea that speaking truth out loud is still something this country can tolerate. Stephen Colbert has been hosting The Late Show on CBS since September of 2015. In the 11 years that followed, he built something that by every traditional measure of success was extraordinary. The show won 11 Emmy Awards. It earned 3 Peabody Awards and 2 Grammys. It pulled in an average of 2.7 million viewers a night in its final season and had sat at the top of the late-night ratings pile for 9 consecutive seasons, a streak that covered pandemics, writers' strikes, political upheaval, and the kind of cultural turbulence that tends to destroy lesser institutions. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert didn't just survive all of that, it thrived. And in May of 2025, during what would turn out to be its last full season on air, the show finally won the Emmy for Outstanding Variety Talk Series. The most-watched late-night show in America won its first Emmy, and was canceled shortly after. That sentence alone should give you pause. It is worth sitting with the contradiction at the center of the story. A show at the peak of its cultural relevance, beloved by its audience, respected by its peers, decorated by its industry, was not renewed. CBS did not hand the franchise to a younger host. It did not retool the format or move the time slot. It simply announced that The Late Show, a brand that had existed on CBS since 1993, first under David Letterman for 22 remarkable years, and then under Colbert for 11, was going away entirely. Not passed on, not reimagined, erased. Colbert found out about the cancellation on the evening of July 16, 2025. He had been on vacation. His manager had known for weeks, but had held off telling him, perhaps hoping to find a better moment, perhaps hoping circumstances might change. They didn't. Colbert learned the news that evening, and the next morning he walked into the Ed Sullivan Theater, the same legendary building where the Beatles had performed on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, the same building Letterman had painstakingly restored and made his own, and he told his studio audience himself. He beat CBS to the announcement. The network had planned to release the news on its own schedule. Colbert didn't give them the chance. What he said that morning was not a breakdown. It was not a bitter tirade. It was measured, warm, and deeply personal in a way that only someone who has genuinely processed painful things can be. He thanked the 200 people who showed up every single day to make the show happen. The writers, producers, camera operators, stage crew, researchers, and assistants whose names never appear in headlines but without whom there is no show. He expressed gratitude for 10 years of calling that theater his home. And then he said something quietly devastating. That he wasn't being replaced, that the whole thing was simply going away, and that he wished someone else were inheriting the franchise instead of it just disappearing. The audience booed when they understood what he was saying. Colbert looked out at them, nodded slowly, and said that he felt exactly the same way. That exchange between a host and the people who had chosen to spend their evenings with him captured everything essential about who he is and what that show had become. Now, CBS has maintained consistently and firmly that the cancellation was a financial decision. The network pointed to the broader economic deterioration of late-night television as a business model, an argument that is, to be fair, not without merit. The late-night landscape has been fragmenting for years. Streaming services have fundamentally altered how people consume entertainment. Younger audiences, in particular, are far less likely to sit down at 11:35 at night and watch a live broadcast than previous generations were. The advertising revenue that once made these shows enormously profitable has migrated toward digital platforms, and the viral clips that Colbert's show produce in abundance. The monologue moments that racked up tens of millions of views on YouTube generated cultural cachet, but not direct revenue for CBS, because CBS does not own YouTube. The Late Show was reportedly losing somewhere between $30 and $40 million annually by the time the cancellation was announced, depending on whose figures you trust. That is a real number. Late-night television is genuinely broken as a commercial enterprise in ways that were not true 15 years ago. But here's the problem with accepting the financial explanation as the whole story. 3 days before CBS made the cancellation official, Colbert addressed something on air that had been generating significant news coverage. Paramount, the parent company of CBS, had agreed to pay $16 million to settle a lawsuit filed by Donald Trump. Trump had alleged that CBS News had deceptively edited an interview with Kamala Harris during the 2024 presidential campaign, specifically a segment that aired on 60 Minutes. The settlement was widely discussed and deeply controversial. Colbert went on television and said plainly that the payment looked to him very much like a bribe. 3 days later, his show was canceled. CBS denied any connection between those two events. But the timing ignited a firestorm that went well beyond television commentary. Senator Elizabeth Warren released a public statement calling on CBS and Paramount to explain whether the cancellation was made for political reasons. The Writers Guild of America called on the New York State Attorney General to investigate whether the decision was connected to Paramount's ongoing merger with Skydance Media, a massive deal that required approval from TH. Federal Communications Commission, whose chairman had previously sent notices to late-night programs about equal-time broadcasting regulations. The FCC approval for that merger came through shortly after the cancellation was announced. These are facts. What you do with them is your own business. But they are difficult to set aside when you're trying to understand the full picture of what happened here. Trump responded to the news of the cancellation publicly, posting on Truth Social that he was thrilled Colbert had been fired and suggesting that Jimmy Kimmel might be next. Colbert addressed this on air with characteristic precision. He said the gloves were off. And then he delivered what many who have followed his career consider the most direct and unguarded monologue he had ever given, which, given that this is a man who spent 9 years making some of the sharpest political commentary in late-night history, is really saying something. To understand why the loss of Stephen Colbert from late-night television lands so hard, you have to understand who he actually is and where he came from. He was born the youngest of 11 children in Washington, D.C., and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. In September 1974, when Colbert was 10 years old, his father James and 2 of his brothers, Paul and Peter, were killed in the crash of Eastern Airlines Flight 212 near Charlotte, North Carolina. 106 of the 141 people on board died. Colbert has spoken about that loss in interviews over the years. Never for sympathy, always with kind of hard-won philosophical clarity that speaks to how deeply he processed it. He has credited his mother with showing him how to grieve without becoming bitter, how to carry enormous loss and still find reasons to laugh, to create, to show up. He went to Northwestern University, where he earned a theater degree in 1986, then moved to Chicago and joined the legendary Second City improv comedy troupe. It was there that he met Amy Sedaris and Paul Dinello, creative collaborators with whom he would go on to make the Comedy Central sketch series Exit 57 in the mid-1990s. He tried, early in his career, to get a writing job at The Late Show with David Letterman. He didn't get it. He eventually landed at The Daily Show with Jon Stewart in 1997, hired on a trial basis by producer Madeline Smith-Berg, and became the longest-running correspondent in that show's history. The Colbert Report followed from 2005 to 2014, a brilliantly sustained performance as a satirical right-wing pundit that earned him a devoted following and demonstrated a level of creative discipline that is genuinely rare in comedy. He spent 9 years playing a character, a version of himself filtered through a specific, exaggerated ideological lens, and did it so convincingly that the character became one of the most recognizable figures in American political satire. When he was announced as Letterman's successor at The Late Show in 2015, there was genuine skepticism. The Colbert Report persona was gone, and nobody was entirely sure who the real Stephen Colbert was on camera. His first season was rocky. The ratings were poor. Critics were uncertain. There was a high-profile stumble during a post-Super Bowl special in February of 2016 that was widely described as a missed opportunity. But then the 2016 presidential election happened, and something in Colbert clicked into place. His monologue sharpened. His voice found its target. His willingness to be not just funny, but genuinely passionate. Angry when anger was warranted. Mournful when grief was appropriate. Joyful when something genuinely deserved celebration. Set The Late Show apart from everything else in its time slot. By the 2016 to 2017 season, the show was #1 in late night for the first time since the Letterman era, averaging over 3.2 million viewers per night. By 2018 to 2019, it had beaten The Tonight Show in the key 18 to 49 demographic. The first time any CBS late-night show had accomplished that since 1994. It held the top position for 9 consecutive seasons. What made those seasons distinctive was not just the ratings, but what Colbert chose to do with the platform. He was not interested in keeping things comfortable. He had Joe Biden on during the COVID-19 pandemic to talk about grief, a conversation that became one of the most watched and most discussed interviews in the show's entire run. He had conversations with guests that went to places most late-night hosts would have been careful to avoid. He asked questions that assumed intelligence and rewarded honesty. He built the kind of trust with guests that produces moments you do not see anywhere else. Moments where someone says something true and unrehearsed because the person across from them has made it feel safe to do so. That is an extraordinarily difficult thing to manufacture, and it cannot be faked. As the final episodes approached in May of 2026, something happened that was unprecedented in the modern history of late-night television. The people who were supposed to be Colbert's competition, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, Seth Meyers, and John Oliver, all appeared together on the same Late Show episode in the penultimate week. Colbert introduced them as his best television friends. He joked that having all 5 of them in the same room meant Jon Stewart was now the designated survivor. The episode had the energy of a reunion between people who had been through something together, which, in a very real sense, they had been. During the Writers Guild of America strike in 2023, the 5 of them had created a podcast called Strike Force 5, donating all proceeds to the staff of their shows. Kimmel went further and announced that on the night of Colbert's finale, he would not air a new episode of his own show. He would run a repeat, not to avoid competition, just to show respect. David Letterman came back to the Ed Sullivan Theater. The man who had spent over 2 decades in that building, who had fought to restore and inhabit it, who had passed it to Colbert as an act of institutional trust, walked back in and received a standing ovation. He did not pretend everything was fine. He told the audience he had every right to be angry, and he made no effort to conceal it. He closed with a paraphrase of the legendary broadcaster Edward R. Murrow that brought the house down and left nothing to imagination about how he felt. Barack Obama also appeared in the weeks before the finale, and during their conversation suggested, with what appeared to be only partial irony, that Colbert might want to consider running for office, noting that the qualifications for the job had shifted in ways that were difficult to dispute. The confirmed guest list of the finale on May 21st, 2026, reads like a compendium of people who understood what they were gathered to honor. Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, Seth Meyers, John Oliver, David Letterman, Tom Hanks, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Pedro Pascal, and The Strokes. Jon Stewart and Steven Spielberg appeared earlier in the final week. Bruce Springsteen performed. The final 4 episodes were not a clip show. Colbert was deliberate about that, but something more intentional, more personal, more earned. As for what happens next, Colbert had already figured that out. Back in March of 2026, he and his son Peter announced through Warner Brothers that they would be writing a new Lord of the Rings film together. The 2 of them had actually pitched the project directly to director Peter Jackson 2 full years before the cancellation. Jackson had responded warmly. Colbert, a genuine encyclopedic Tolkien superfan, the kind who once recited Aragorn's entire biography from memory on live television, which prompted Viggo Mortensen to later send him an entire platter of Lord of the Rings characters carved from chocolate, had been sitting on this dream for years, knowing that the show made it impossible to pursue. He told people in March, with a dry smile, that his summer schedule had suddenly opened up in a way he hadn't planned for. 11 Emmys, 2 Grammys, 3 Peabody's, 1,100 episodes, 9 straight years at #1, a first Emmy in the final season, a farewell attended by legends, and behind all of it, a man who lost his father and 2 brothers at 10 years old, who battled panic attacks in his 30s, who spent years wondering whether he had made the right choices, and who went on to host the most-watched late-night show in America for nearly a decade. The audience booed when he told them it was over. He nodded and said he felt exactly the same way. After everything, after all the ratings and awards and 9 years at the top, the saddest part of this story is not that Stephen Colbert is leaving. It is that he was pushed. And the reason he was pushed is something that a lot of people in a lot of powerful rooms would very much prefer you to not think too carefully about.